don't you sit down and it'll be 60 seconds at the most. All right, good evening. Let's try that again. Good evening. There we go. Boy, I knew there was some fire out there somewhere. It's nice to have you here. My name is Tom Reese, and I am privileged to serve as president here at Concordia University. We have been enormously blessed to have the Heritage Edition of the St. John's Bible on our campus this year. The theme of our academic year is The Word Became Flesh, and of course this Bible has really put a nice different kind of a twist on that familiar theme from John chapter 1. We have all 7 volumes of the Heritage Edition on display in the Library Technology Center, which will be open after the presentation here, so if you'd like to take a look at those, you're certainly more than welcome to do that. Of course, all of you know, I'm sure, that Donald Jackson does the invitations for the Queen. My wife said, "Really?" when she heard that, so that was kind of fun. And also that he had this wonderful vision for the first hand-lettered copy of the Scriptures and hand-illuminated since the Middle Ages. And what a magnificent vision and what a great partnership. We're so proud in Minnesota that St. John's University stepped up to the task in partnering for that wonderful work of art that we enjoy. So perhaps many of you know that the first words penned on Ash Wednesday in the year 2000 were "in the beginning," and the last words penned in 2011, although Dr. Jackson at dinner did confide to me that he was doing some touch-up work last week. So he's a delightful conversationalist. His wife Mabel is here with him, and we are so pleased to have them here. So please welcome to the podium Donald Jackson.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Can you hear me everywhere? Right. Well, now I'm just going to put this back in wherever it fell from just now. Excuse me. Great start. I better put it in my pocket. There we are. How about that? Is it good? Good. Excellent. It's downhill from now on. This feels so good being here because I keep seeing lots of friends from many years in this part of the world, and it's can't be an accident that the St. John's Bible, or as a Bible, came here and came to Minnesota, and people had the innocence, some would say naivety, to back somebody's dream. It's been bumpy at times. I mean, there was a point where we were all looking at each other, particularly when we were working on the Heritage Edition, where we're trying to translate the original into a printed version to become a work of art in its own right. Somebody suggested that we should have sweatshirts made with St. John's Bible on the front and on the back. Seemed like a good idea at the time. So yes, we've had the bumps. But the nice things are now, where everybody's enjoying that, and not the least us, because when we step back, it doesn't feel like it's ours anymore. It's now yours. It's got a life of its own and speaks to you only when you speak to it. I mean, no work of art exists unless there's a human being there, unless there is somebody there that gives a work of art life. It's a conversation. It's what you bring to it that makes it what it is to you. So it's always a partnership. I actually hadn't meant to say that at all. I just came out. What I want to do tonight is to share a bit, as much as I can, in the time we have together, something of what the St. John's Bible has shared with us, me in particular. because I'm speaking on behalf of others too. But so to do that, what I'm proposing to do is show you some images, talk to those images, talk about them, share a bit about myself actually, because quite often it's what I have brought to it. What was it that made me be a calligrapher, you know, without going into it any length of time. But I think that's sort of part of introducing me to you, and also to introducing what I and my associates have brought to making this Bible, and why. Why would anybody handwrite and illuminate a Bible? Is now a good time to say, well, actually, people, as a calligrapher, I mean, to start with, you're an odd person. I mean, how anybody makes a living doing that? I mean, anybody who tries to make a living, there isn't a job. I mean, if you look for in the ads for jobs, you don't see calligraphy, X, Y, Z, this, that, and the other. No, there are no jobs. I can promise you there are no adverts for any jobs. My poor father died in his 70s, still waiting for his eldest son to get a proper job. I didn't have a job. Still didn't know what I was doing by the time he died. So, so there is always that explanation, but what it is this. I started to have doubts in what it was, what the direction I was going just then, but I just hang on. Really what it is, we're all, how do I get into this better then? When, as a child, somebody gave me a pen which you dipped in, gave me a bottle of red ink, gave me a piece of paper, and said, see what you can do with this. This was an aunt who had been driven to utter distraction of what to do with this rambunctious little whatever, who'd been, been dumped on her. She didn't know what to do with me, and she just gave me this, and she changed my life. Because the moment that ink and that pen and that paper in my hands made marks, the shiny ink, red, on this plain piece of paper, I was hooked. I was hooked by the magic of that connection, of that instantaneous grasping of a moment when you take an instrument, be it a pen or a brush, and pour yourself out onto that page. So if you then fast forward to the point where you're a calligrapher who works with letters, with words, well then what better way to grasp the words of the scriptures than by taking a pen and writing those words out, letter by letter, word by word, line by line, each little piece of energy, because most people think calligraphers are really tight and neat and very precise and careful, and yes, but not to the point where the life is lost. There has to be an opening for something to go wrong. You have to throw yourself onto that page. Even though they're small units, they contain energy, they contain breath, they contain the beat of your heart as you do it. Now then, fast forward a bit more, someone else sees that page. On one level or another, that is what they pick up on. They're picking up on your heartbeat, your breath, bringing theirs to yours. So you have engaged the person or people who are looking by the act of reaching out and writing out those words. So it's about communication, but it's not just communication literal, it's also from energy, and it's also inviting people to ponder, to stay and open themselves up to that. So it's a big responsibility. Well, but it isn't always a Bible. I mean, you don't make a living doing Bibles, I can promise you. I mean, there's been a lot of, you just heard, it hasn't been done for 500 years, so There can't be a lot of opportunity. So enough of that. You've got a bit used to my voice now, and so what I'm going back to the plan is I'm going to show some images. They will spark things from me. There is a thread, and because we've got to me, I sense an excitement in the group tonight. What I'm going to take a chance, and I want to at various times throw open the floor to a few questions. It's a risk because we can't run on forever tonight. We can't be here tomorrow morning, etc. But I would like to do that because I think I'd like you to bring to me some of your feelings and questions. So you will be getting that chance if I can do it. And I've got a good team of people here to help me through this. And start by a little story. I think this piece up here, when I was a teenager, I wanted to study calligraphy, and I wanted to copy an illuminated manuscript I'd seen in a museum about 12 or 15 miles away from where I lived in the north of England. And of course I went in there with my little paint box and thinking, it'd be okay if I sat in a corner and just looked at went up to the glass and came back and did a little drawing and so on. Because I realized in order to do something now, I had to look at something that already existed. I had to look at something to copy, to feed me with the opportunity to learn how to do the colors, to what things to do, the scale of it, and so on. So I went to the museum, and I didn't have any social skills. Well, I don't have an awful lot now, but then I had even less. And also, I didn't have any social introductions or anything like that. And I went into this museum, and of course, I'm talking to a scholar. He's not used to messy sort of little art students, because that's what I was at that point. And I said, could I copy this? He said, no way, I don't want, this is for scholars, and you have, by the way, this is for graduate students in here, not for anybody as young as you. So I went home, I got a postcard that I'd picked up from a museum in Scotland, and I copied it, and that's it. And I went back to the museum 10 days or so later, and I just talked my way in to the office of the director, and I just put that on his desk. And he just went white as a sheet because he thought I'd cut it out of one of his books, you see. So he said, well, where did you get this from? And I said, well, I did it. And to his eternal credit, he did say, well, I don't know any of my scholars that could do this. And he said, I certainly couldn't. He said, so bring your paints and get on with it, you see. So there's two tales here. One is beware of the rambunctious kid. They may even turn out to be a calligrapher or something of that kind, and send their parents to their graves wondering what the heck he's doing. But more seriously, the point is that don't turn away somebody from your door if they're seeking knowledge. And I don't know, it seems very light in here, but can you see this quite clearly? Is it working all right for you? Okay, let me just get moving. It feels almost as if we want to go dark and then before we start, but I know they want to get you on film. So looking back at the past, you learn a lot. You learn about the attractiveness of it. I mean, there is something engaging about that. You want to look at it because it's got birds and things and decorations, flowers, and so on. What you might not realize is, well, there you are, that it's also for a person, it's for a client. This is obviously a very well-worn book, and it's been looked at a lot, but this is very, almost certainly, the person for whom it was made. And it's a relatively young man who likes his pleasures, and he likes to sit in the garden. He likes to read and he has a flower in his hand. Now, when I looked at that first, I thought it was a glass of wine, but I think that was projection. So I've got to concede it is a flower, and here's some. But, you had to have a client. Somebody made it for somebody. It's a book of ours, a book of devotion, just to dip into on a daily basis in that tradition. But it's pretty roughly done. In fact, it's a professional piece that's been done, but not by monks doing it for the the love of God. It was done by a professional calligrapher or in an illuminator's shop, churning them out as fast as they could. And also, they'd have a specialist artist come in, probably got paid quite a lot more money for doing that than the people doing the calligraphy. And the book was done very cheaply. It was done hurriedly. It was done by somebody who was deeply unhappy. And really, actually, it's true, but it's also quite serious, because you have to have your heart in what you're doing for it to feel good. But the truth is, he was rather hampered, or I'm guessing it would be a he in those days, because the parchment, which this is written on, if you look at the surface of it, you can see how rough it is. It was very hastily prepared skin, probably the cheapest you could buy, sheepskin, and heavy-handedly scraped on both sides. A nightmare to write on. That's why I can confidently say it was an unhappy person. Because if you just don't, you have to have that unity of tools and materials in your hand and the surface, and when those work together, it lifts your heart. And that also is the other element that goes into the writing, is the way you feel. If you're rejoicing in the way you go, then that person who reads it later has a chance of picking up on that. So what I can see just objectively here is that the skin was so thin that the ink on the other side was bleeding right through. So think, when you've got to write on this, you've got to write on top of something that's already looking horrible by the time you get to it. And as if I just go back to that one, that's a letter S that just filled up because the ink blobbed there. So that's what I really mean. So it is a question when you look at the past, you look at techniques, you look at materials, you look at the way the ink flows, because if the ink isn't flowing well, then the work isn't flowing well. So you've got to I don't like the cookery, I'm not attracted to the cookery side of calligraphy, the mixing out of inks and the grinding of colors. It's not something in itself that I would take a pleasure in. It's just that you have to do it, because you can't buy it, because nobody's aiming in the same as high as you are with what it is. I'm aiming for something that works well. It's not just a color. It's a color that will flow. It's a color that will give you that lift of the heart, as it were. So that's sort of what you're learning from the past. You learn also. Now here is a piece, very simple, no decoration to speak of. There's a little bit there, in that bit. That's done with the corner of a pen. The same person who was doing, it's not a thin pen, I don't think, thinner than this necessarily. It's just they took the corner of it, which gives you thins, and just drew it like that. Very quick. This piece is Italian, late 14th century, I guess. But it was done with absolute mastery. Look at these O's. Look how the same they are. That doesn't happen without a lot of mastery. And the way that these strokes are made, the L, for instance, here, is done like this. It's done first that stroke, then sliding back on itself, a lovely little quick thing like that, and then beautiful bounce and up again. So it takes off and flies. It's a movement, and if you were watching me as I did this, my whole body did that. You're sitting down, you still, you watch a violinist in an orchestra playing, but if you watch their feet starts there. You could actually, the stage is doing it. So the letter form starts on the ground. It comes up through you and just under control makes that. And again, that added amount of things. So I think I made that point quite well. But the thing is that this person, well, I'm not going to do any more dancing than that, I can tell you. But this person was dancing. And these letters were dancing along with each other. They hold hands. That flows into that. That letter this is an abbreviation. But the way that goes into that R, and so this is a letter S, but that's a letter S. So there's quite a lot of elements going on, but there's a flow and a life in it, and a mastery. So looking at the past, you learn those things. Those that give you things to aim for, things to avoid, things to aim for. Okay, you also find out that people are only human. They do make mistakes. And of course here, this person is pointing out, you've missed a line out here. What? Tie a rope attached to the line which you write here. And put it back in there. And of course that is one of the first questions anybody asks anyone who's worked on the Bible project. Whatever happens when you make a mistake? Because if you make a mistake, it isn't, well, I mean, sort of, we usually sort of say a prayer or something. Actually, it's not one you could print, by the way. But you do have, there is that. There is a risk. It's not like going onto a battlefield and being shot at, but it's certainly a risk. And the simple answer to that is, if you miss out a line, that is the worst, because you've got to go back to where you did it. Now, if on the third line from the bottom you missed out a line, you could probably, given the right skin, and we were working on very high quality ones, and a very sharp, specialized knife, you could erase that 3 lines. Take a risk on not doing what you saw on that manuscript, where make it too thin, and you could repair, and you could simply, you push, then you burnish the skin down again, dust it with some resist as kind of resin, and then write over it. And usually the eye of the beholder is quite forgiving. They just generally just don't, they take it in the whole page, and they don't go for that. But if you do it 3/4 of the way up the page, and if that page is one which is a very tender skin, it happens to be more, it doesn't have the toughness to take a scraping, then you would have to put your hands in the air and do exactly that. And that's what here and there, all of us did it. All of us got to the bottom of a column of 52 lines, and hearts sink, because you don't have another line to put on that 52nd line. You're looking up, because we're copying a script above, and it's so easy to look up at the wrong line, because some of it makes sense. It just flows, and it makes sense, but it isn't the right line. I did it on the very first page of the book of Genesis. So, and if you look at the book now, if you ever get a chance to look at you'll see what I did. Did it very simply. I couldn't make a joke out of it, not on that page. But on some of the other pages, then some humor has been used as well. So that sort of a mistake, small mistakes like a letter here and there, you can erase and absorb it into the line. And don't forget, we were all, the calligraphers, the 5 plus me scribes working on the text of these volumes, we were writing it in American, and we're English. Now, you've noticed we don't spell everything the same way. So it was full of pitfalls like that. You have every letter and every word, you've really got to be alert, and you've got to try and hit the line on the right-hand side to try and balance it. It's not always easy. You have to eyeball it. You can't trade. You look at the text and eyeball it. So there's that element of tension also, as well as skill. But those looking at the back, looking at the past, then gives you a repertoire. It gives you and actually copying and trying to get the skills and techniques gives you the chance to do things of our own time. I don't think there's a lot of point in copying the past for its own sake and then framing up what you just copied. On the other hand, I don't think there's any point in copying something and halfway through deciding, oh, I'll do it my version. The idea is to subject yourself to the master of the past and lose as much of yourself as you can in order for things to come in. You, unless you're open, how can things enter? So that's another side of the artist's growth, is to cultivate openness to others and the work of others, and as you see, the humanity, the mistakes, the skills, the tools. And so before long I started to do things which were using the techniques of gold here and here that were used in the Middle Ages, but not in the same way. And the other thing, challenge too, for a calligrapher or a lettering artist, is how do you make things look? How do you convey what they're supposed to convey? How can you convey a message? In other words, how can you make something look serious by the way you write it or the way you letter it? How can you make something look regal, as in a sort of you're doing a royal document, which was referred to earlier. I do not, by the way, do Queen Elizabeth's or any other Queen's invitation cards, but what over the last 50 years I have done has been official documents of certain kinds, special occasions, for which bear which are done in the words of the sovereign, so that they are either, legal documents of various things. I won't go into that side of it, but that's been a part of my life all those years. Not a full-time job, part-time, just whenever they were needed. So how do you make things look as if they mean what they're supposed to mean? And there's that side of it, the responsibility. There's also a responsibility, I think, to make space in your life to play with things, to play with letter forms, to play with marks, without the constraints of a specific requirement, without a deadline, and without the necessity for, in this case, somebody to be able to read it even. All this is a preparation for coming up with ideas. People say, where do you get ideas from? Well, you get them from here. They come from within. You also get them from, as you've seen, an amalgam of what you see, of where you are. I'm losing the thread a bit of where I think I want to go, so I'm going to look at my note in a minute. But, play. And here I did, and so everything's not serious. I have to make a living. This is me doing a series of posters for a major bank in the UK, taken to marry up with a crazy series of very successful commercials that they wanted putting on too. So here we have the cars coming out. And you can see the date of it there by looking at her, the very modern cell phone that she had. So, so you have to turn your hand to a lot of things in order to do the things you really want to do whenever they come along. Jobs for publications, did a little thing there that was a family concern. This is going back a long way, but I pulled it in for tonight. So I did the stall here, set out the Christmas stall, and then I gave it to our two kids to fill up with toys. They did the drawings. Our daughter doing presumably the girly things, and he did the airplanes and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, that's just publications, drawings of the Christmas cards, and so on. Even this is actually me. You'll notice the hair is a bit different, and sign painting. For that turned into a very long-standing and great relationship with the clients there, and engraved glass in a hospital Teaching, this is my, I'm sure the professors here are dressed very similarly, but and of course if they get mad when you don't do assignments. Well, some people in this room were present when I was doing that. It was because it wasn't very many miles from here. But that was to make. Of course, then there are the emergency moments when you realize you've forgotten to do a card for your wife when she's coming home. So it all grist to the mill. And I don't know what happened there, but here we are. That's another thing. I just need to check with my what I wanted to say, because we're getting on fine, you know, but we could carry on like this for a long time, but I'm not sure that's, I think you're having too good a time. I think we're going to have to get serious here. But the point about, before we leave the past, I just want a couple of things. You may not have thought this through. I know people in this room certainly have and are ahead of me on this. A letter looks like a letter A because we associate a letter A with it. And somehow or other, it looks like a letter A. It also feels like a letter A, is what I was trying to say. The point is, letter forms, we use basically 26 in the alphabet. But they came from all corners of the earth, as it were. They came through the Egyptian, they came through the Greek, the Roman, and also points in between. And they don't always fit that nicely together because they didn't all came at one go out of the same egg. We have to tussle to get them to work with each other. So there's a kind of DNA in those forms, which I believe goes so far back into our own consciousness when we're little. You know, our kids don't like change. They like repetition. They like to be reassured that what you told them yesterday is the same today. Well, we, I think, have got that embedded in us about the alphabet. And so there are limitations one way or the other. So when we play with things, we push the boundary, but we can't push them to the point where you can't read them. I'm going to stop looking at the notes. I think I've covered what I wanted to say there, but I don't quite know what I'm expecting to come up, because what happened was I rejigged the images tonight because of you. I thought, it's not that I give this talk the same every time anywhere, because I haven't been talking much at all until just comparatively this last week or two. And but I just changed it to the point where I don't know what's coming, so let's see. That briefly is, you know, the beginning of how the Bible came along. I had a terrible trouble knowing how to get started. So I did what I'd just been talking about, went back to the past. I admired a particular Bible, which I'd seen. It's called the Winchester Bible, and there were big deluxe Bibles of the 12th century. And I liked the columns which gave each of the pages strength. I wanted it to be 2 columns so that I could have illustrations here and there, move the columns around, give spaces where certain stories occurred, and give us the chance to interpret those to accompany the text. This happens to be, as some of you may know, is the loaves and fishes, the parable of the loaves and fishes. But what I don't want to do tonight is to give you a story after story of what layer after layer of what is involved in all of the illuminations of the Bible. We do not have time. But I will talk about some, because they do have a lot of meaning. And every one of those illuminations, whoever did it, had a great deal of thought. And before anything could happen, this is the inside of the studio where I work, and this is this book, Historical Books, which is the biggest volume. And everything was, first of all, laid out on by the computer and jiggled around, and some things happen where they have to happen. These are book headings, these little red blobs everywhere. They happen, that you can't design those to go somewhere else. Those are book headings, chapters, different elements. And so that was hit. And I would then sketch out where I wanted to make, what would be going where, and so on and so forth. So that at least gives you an idea. But at the beginning, I didn't know what, and also who or how. And I did think, make no mistake, did I want to do it all myself? Yes. I didn't want to share it with anybody else. Seriously, it's true. But I had to learn that. That's one of these things. You had to learn to share that. And then it became what you might call a management challenge, because any calligraphers in this room will know this, that trying to get calligraphers to do the same thing at the same time is like trying to herd cats, and you know that's the case. Everybody's wanting to go in a different direction. We are now imprinted with the idea that we are individualists, and we don't actually, and our worth is tied up in how different we are from somebody else, often, in the creative world. So the challenge was for us all to buy into the same alphabet, the same mission. And that was a huge learning thing, and a wonderful one, where you learn that by respecting others, you get respect in return, and by doing that, we all, the cliche being that the sum of the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And that was a great side of this Bible project. So you've got Angela, Susan, Sue, Sally Mae, and Brian. Brian and I were at college together, and all these three were studied in the same college, but I just knew them, and I knew their work and respected their work, and gradually they came on board as we needed to get the job finished. And this shows you what the job involves. Writing with a quill on the parchment. If you look at the very tip of that, you'll see how much ink is there. You have to have a lot of ink to be able to move fast, move to the pace that the letter form needs. So that shows you it. I actually keep on being surprised by which slides are coming up, so I'm going to keep going. I'm sure I'll get there somewhere. I'm actually too slow at the moment. So, and this, of course, is what happened in the end. I didn't write out an alphabet and say, copy this. I suggested various things. I knew it had to be a certain weight. I said, how do you make something look sacred? If I'd done that in handwriting or italic, it would have been too insubstantial. It needed to have more of a classic sense of Sunday best about it. And so, although it flows, it's certainly formal. So that's one step towards how it becomes fitting for a Bible. And so my assistant, Sarah, who works with computers, which I don't much, I just said, look, let's take a bit out of each, that each one of us has done, and put them together and see what happens. Well, what happens is, that, that bit's done by me, that bit done by somebody else, that bit's done by... But if you wouldn't actually spot that. We were all marching to the same rhythm, to the same beat by the end. But then, here again, on a calligraphic note, what you're doing is you're playing with different elements. So this is text. This is your standard Bible text. This is the book of Revelation, and this particular book I wrote, did everything myself in it, because I did promise that myself I would do. But that's your standard Bible text. Then it breaks into poetry, so you change size. It's also slightly different. It's slightly more informal, more spoken, and more, in some cases, sung. And then you have another form. So you're playing with different weights of lettering on the same page, and they all have to belong to the same, somehow the same family, the same piece of work. And so you have this balancing act between people, as it were, dancing on the same stage. And in the end, of course, we have this terrific array of ways of writing and lettering throughout the book. And you've got different artists there and mixed in, and I just took some sections of people's work throughout. So it gets really quite rich and very and great fun. The people having fun doing that, I have to say. And this is me having lots of fun because I get to do all the caps. And that's when everything's finished. So everything's finished. Mind you, you had Thomas Ingmar probably work for 6 or 8 weeks on one page, and you're doing the capitals on it. So you better get it right. You know, this is the problem. And you're working often on a piece like this, which has an illumination there, maybe an illumination on the back of that page, a whole page of writing here. It's not as if you could scrape it off or, as with a canvas, just put it against the wall and pick up another one. You can't. You have to build into yourself a spirit of fearlessness, actually, where you have to take a brush and smack it onto that. You have here's, this gift, I'm just revisiting what it looks like before somebody starts to do illumination on it. This is a mistake. I'm rushing forward here because I'm not getting to where I want to. This is one solution where I think this was Brian made a mistake. He missed out a line. So our natural history painter artist, I asked him to invent something which would at least lighten the mood a bit there. And so there you've got the piece there where it's got to go up into there. That was one solution. We've got others, but a minute. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to. What's going on in my mind is I'm having to let go of something because I was expecting something else coming up, and I've got to let go of it. So there's plenty to talk about. Now I need to just. I've got to reframe myself. It's okay. You look to the past, and how do you get your ideas for the Bible? Where do these ideas come from for the illuminations and so on, the interpretive ones? Well, first off, you get a brief from the theologians at St. John's, monks, scholars, artists. So no pressure. You got to. They send you this piece, and on here, that there with the ring binder, is a typical set of briefs for this volume, which is, well, I mean, I don't know quite which volume that is, but then I'll take note, I'll highlight what I think would consist of the exegesis, which is basically what that means in their understanding. They will then give you some background, historical, of what's going on in the Middle East or at that time with the children of Israel, or whether they're in, the historical side of it, and geographical. And also, finally, some ideas about what they think might look good or tell the story best. And in that area, I had to learn something. I had to learn that they would put down a list of things. It could be 6 or 7 things. And I, to begin with, used to think, I have to do all of those things. And I was killing myself trying to design 6 or 7 different elements on one page or across a page. And eventually, with the relationship developed, I realized, actually, I could choose. They were just throwing them on the table. So that I had to dig deeper into myself in order to come up with something that convinced me. It had to mean something to me if it was going to ever mean anything to anybody else. and some of these Bible stories take a bit of swallowing. I mean, if you don't mind me saying so. So, I just realized where I am. It's okay, Tom, I'm not looking at you. And so what happens is, I would have a dialogue between myself and them. And I would look to the Bible. And then I would look back at it. And then I would make notes to myself. What is going on here? What is it saying to me? What are the punchlines? How can I bring that out visually? And I looked in a traditional, you've got a traditional way you look at the historical past. What I found useful was going back to sculptures and artifacts from that period, from that, as near as you could guess or ascertain, that period. And I could give you a whole almost thesis on the way that the images of the evangelists have, come down to us over the centuries. But I didn't do that. I turned it on its tail, and I looked at, when I see them talking about winged figures and in the scripture, and they talk about lions' heads on human beings and the oxes' heads and eagles, and you look in the British Museum at the Assyrian relief carvings, well, that's what they were walking past when those people wrote that. They were walking past things like that in the street. So it wasn't that wondrous, but it was part and parcel of their life. And so I started with that and incorporated those in some of the illumination. This is that the Chebar. At any rate, that gave me the clue for this, because in this scripture, in this part, he talks about something like, anyway, what he meant was rainbow. And so I picked up on that theme as a theme of hope, and that became part of the iconography of the volume, so it was played out through several of the pages. I'm going to push through. Also, of course, we live in the age of the computer and the web. So, museum, yes, go to that as one does, as I did as a 19-year-old. But now, I could just say, we want skeletons, we want, we're talking about how do we go about coming across with an interpretation of the Valley of the Dry Bones, where literally, if you read it literally, it says that people will die, and then they'll come up and the flesh will grow back on their bones and they'll start to live again as we understand it, as we presently are. Well, that didn't compute with me at all. I mean, I just couldn't get with that. But one of the hints that the theologian said was, of course, there are the present day images of bones. We all have them. From the Holocaust, there's plenty of options. I mean, it's happening all the time. And so the web, look at that for ideas, and there we have. I turned it, let me just go back down here. You've got Armenia, Bosnia, Auschwitz, Rwanda, Iraq, just to name a few. And the senselessness of that, and let that horror come into you, let the senselessness of that and the enormity of it inform your feeling for what you're about to do with the scriptures. Then, what I then did was, I started to think too about what we're doing to our planet, not just about the skeletons of people, but the trash and the sort of throwaway horrible things we're doing, not just to each other, but to our world, by the way we live and expect things to be. So we end up with piles. We all know where there's car wrecks, yards. We all know where there's dumps full of all kinds of stuff. And we just don't even know what's happening to the chemicals that are seeping into the ground. So this is another aspect of it. You know, crime against ourselves, crime against our world. And but in it, there has to be some hope, and there is, and I could get that. I could get the hope because I looked again at the scriptures, and it didn't say anything about people jumping around with having their flesh put back on bones. To me, what was sticking out was, I will put my spirit within you, and you shall live. That I could get behind. The idea of the spirit living on, that the spirit being awakened, that I could. And so there was this other thing of, I have to be convinced of what mattered to me. And that then inspired me to take that horror and take that little bit of hope, which is just what happens when you put oil in water, and the very floor of that wrecker's yard, when it rains, actually produces indescribable beauty. And from it, it grew up to, to redemption and the menorah shapes of the tradition going forward. Now, just I'm getting tired of listening to myself here. I'm sorry about it. No, seriously, but I'm sensing that. So what I want to do is get to a point with the images, and I'm going to just ask you to stick your hands in the air, because something's going wrong with the way I'm wanting to, the points I'm wanting to make. So I'm going to share the responsibility of this a little in a minute. Let me just try, see, so there you have it. There you see what I'm saying. I'm saying it's not just something that happened in the past. It's not just something that happened in some other African or other country. We're also part of it. And taking inspiration from everyday life. This was, just somebody having lunch in Africa becomes the thing here, about the horrors that we bring onto each other, but again, the wonderfully uplifting words of the scripture there. And I chose an African child because the African child is the one that embodies, for most of us, starvation and oppression, really, of one human being against another, of a whole culture against another, or cultures within itself. But in that, I also, by the way, just made on top of it little impressions which are blown up from the chain mesh that's all around Guantanamo. So it's not just other people, it's our problem. This is the wonderful thing about working on that Bible so long, is you realize how relevant it is. It's just like the 9 o'clock, it's just like looking at the TV, and just like looking at the news. It's just exactly the same. People are trying their best to get things right, and they're all screwing up all the time. But then that's it. But that doesn't. So the aiming for perfection. The analogy is, when producing this volume, the calligraphers who were working, I used to say, perfection is not an option. It isn't an option. You're doing things by a hand. The door slams. Your hand shakes. Perfection is not an option. But perfection of intention is an obligation. You've got to keep trying to get better. And that happens with your craft work, and it happens with your life. So it becomes a complete circle. This piece I hadn't intended to put in. It's just one shot of one of those impossible briefs that I thought were impossible when I first was working in the Gospels. And this was where the committee had said, right, we want 5 parables of this, the widow and the lost coin, the shepherd and the lost sheep, Yes, the prodigal son, and next is the I'm fading here, but the man who passes on the other side, the Good Samaritan. Thank you. And then of course the prodigal son, and then Lazarus being the poor man going to heaven over and above the rich man. So that plus the story of Martha and Mary, and that was all supposed to go on 1/2 page. So, there were problems there, logistical as well as, other sort. But I put that in here because the thing that hit me, and some of you know, you've heard me say this before, because it was one of those points in this project where I realized that actually I could, as a vehicle, put something to what the theologians were asking for without them asking for it. In other words, I was giving them what they wanted, even though they didn't know they wanted it. And when I was doing this and struggling, and actually the theory of this is, of course, the lost coin, and the whole point, as it was pointed out to me, it wasn't my idea, was that all of these are, to the audience of the day, would have been completely stupid. Why would you spend all day looking for a little coin of no worth? But the point meaning is that God would do something that was beyond your comprehension in order to bring you love for your love in return, or however badly I put that, I think you know what I mean. So there is this repetition of the same theme from this darkness here up to light of God, the love. We're looking for the one sheep. Again, a really ridiculous story, to the listener, because why would you leave 99 sheep which could easily get lost in order to find one? These were parables in order to get over the fact that love was the main thing, and a love of God is not comprehensible to us. And likewise, the story of the person from another caste, really, crossing the boundaries of one religion or one set of beliefs in order to help somebody of another set. You wouldn't do that, but God will do it. So here, though, then you have this the parable of the prodigal son. We all know that. Well, I did. I was a kid. I was raised. I went to a church school, a little Methodist school, and so we had a lot of Bible. Boy, did I hate that kid, because I was the eldest son, you see, and who didn't want to just smack that kid? Because he spent all the money. He ended up getting completely in a mess. Ends up not only looking after pigs, eating what the pigs ate. Again, an impossible thing to concede for a Jew. So that week, I was working on that. 9/11. Who wouldn't want to smack the back at that? The first reaction, anger. First reaction, pain, and helpless anger. And I just made the connection. Those parables are asking us to do the impossible. God could do the impossible. And I realized there and then, in working out that this was something where you can't hate yourself out of this problem. You have to love yourself out of it. Impossible. An impossible ask in a time like that. And I put that up because of today's papers. And yesterday's, and on the news. And I just share that, because for what it's worth, impossible love. But it's what we have to aim for. Right. I just want to see what's next. And here we have I'll leave that up there. Who would like to ask a question? And if you want to shout it, it'll be quicker than having somebody give you a mic. Anybody got anything to ask? Now look, it's not an auction. You can... Yes, what would you like to say? Would you please... How many artists worked on this Bible? You should buy Christopher Calderhead's book, which will be coming out soon, which will give you everything. Quite seriously, it's been revised, which gives you chapter and verse. Every single person who did anything in it has got full credit and says. But basically, when you say artists, we're talking illustrators, illuminators. Thomas Ingmeyer, Suzanne, who's from San Francisco, Suzanne Moore, who lives off the coast of Seattle. You've got Hazel Dolby in England. You've got the natural history artist. And am I missing anybody? The other people were calligraphers. Sally May, who did not only calligraphy, but also did some of the special treatments where the volume has been lifted up, where you see some of the marginal, and I'll show you. So that not a vast amount. You had calligraphers, you had, as I said, 5 other than me. You had a Hebrew calligrapher from Jerusalem came in to do the running headlines in Hebrew where the source of the text was Hebrew. Where the source of the text that's come down to us is in Greek, then I tended to do that. Just a reminder where the roots of all this came from, of the traditions. And as in this piece, where the whole, the tree, this is a whole lesson in itself, but I couldn't get my head around this. This was the very first illumination I did. They, in their wisdom at St. John's, the PR people there had organized a press conference, TV, this and this. So deadlines, no pressure. Oh yes, there was. So this was an unveiling at the Minneapolis Institute of Art, and I had not even agreed with the committee at St. John's what was going to be done. It was the very first pickle out of the jar, the worst one. So you just didn't know, because once you commit to that, to some degree you're committing to what follows. And we were starting with the Gospels and Acts, which was the worst one to start with because it won with the most illuminations. And probably would have benefited from being the last. However, these things are the way they are. They wanted the Gospels, and they wanted the Psalms, and they wanted the Genesis, the book of Genesis, because they had no idea what this man from England was going to produce, or Wales. They didn't even know if they'd get to the second volume, so they wanted those volumes in that order because those mattered more to them. They could use those. So that's a little question nobody asked, but I've told it to you. And so, so this thing, as a child, you listened, and such a body begat, such a body begat, such a body, whatever that meant, and had no real reason. And it was actually a Lutheran friend who pointed out to me that these names, which are all the names of the ancestors of Jesus, were not, and some of them are no better than they should have been. They weren't all heroes. Some of them weren't even married to the women that the children had, and so on and so forth. And I'm thinking, sounds like my family. In fact, it sounds like almost anybody's family. And I then got the message that this is all of us. This means all of us. We are all connected. And that's what led to the DNA being brought into it, to imply just that connectedness, however hard that is to get your head around it there. And also I asked for the names of the wives or the women involved in, and so I put into it. And at the bottom, obviously, I coming down to Abraham. And of course, the main stem is the menorah, which is a very easily recognizable Jewish symbol. And alongside that, of course, I also learned that the handmaiden of Abraham produced Ishmael, and of course is looked upon as therefore the son of Abraham, but that then was the beginning of the alternative tradition, because from that line came the prophet Muhammad. And so in that case, all I did was just write that word, her name, in Arabic, just to let it be known that there are other ways, that there are other people follow different paths from the same roots, just as we all look back to the past and from that past produce different blossoms in our own lives and our own makings. So I started to convince myself as I went along, and that helped. Now, I need to just fly on. This is just shows you that I think I had somehow or other this is anyway, this shows you, if you look at the size of that brush there, I mean, that is taking a risk when you are smacking that on. When you know, there's my sketch at the side, and I'm trying to capture that here. It's taking a risk because there's your sketch. Just stuck piece of paper, this, and this, and that is how the basic of it was. I'm going to tell the story. In the early days of sending back designs to the client, back here to Minnesota, we didn't have, at both ends of the Atlantic, we didn't have quite the ability to send images by digitally, just like that, like we all now take for granted. Remember, this last 15, 16 years, 17 years, there's a lot of changes happened in the graphics world. And so I was doing a sketch, and I was taking it down to my local color Xerox shop, 4 miles away. They would print it, I'd stick the pieces together, and then send them by FedEx to Collegeville, Minnesota. They would then look at these color Xerox mock-ups of my idea. And then I got back this email, we were on to that at least, which said, we like the general idea and so on, but we were really mystified by the symbolism of the little grey patches, the rectangles that you've put or in various places. Scotch tape. So we moved from the Scotch tape era to, by the time we finished, to a much better communication. Sorry, I digress. I'm going to just, in the hopes that I'll find a point at which I can stop, I'm going to and ask you something. I'm just going to go forward a little. This is getting. There is the basic canvas. This is the book of Psalms. So the book of Psalms has 5 books. And these symbolize the openings of the 5 books. And you know the question about where ideas come from? I once asked my old professor, how do I get ideas? She said, put the pen in the ink. Put the brush in the paint. Don't sit around waiting for ideas. Let that chemistry I talked about at the very beginning, that glistening ink, that paper, that swish, that action, let that feed your ideas. It triggers you. It gets things moving. So I digress. In this case, I wanted to capture the sounds of different sacred songs from different traditions. This is a Roman Catholic client, and yes, the major element of it is actually oscillographs taken from the monks singing the psalms at St. John's. And so what I did was get these different oscillographs from others, which you can just read there, the Adhan being the call to prayer, and I used those, I stamped those on, made little rubber stamps and stamped them on, like that, to give that sense of all these different voices, all different traditions, Native American, Canyon chants, all being sent up to the sacred, being offered up to the sacred as a connection by voice. And so that carried that forward, and also adding gold of the sort of suggestion of temples. And there you have, using a stencil brush, using frisket, which you can't see, and then from left to right, you have the songs of the Psalms being sung, and the black too. And then vertically, you've got the songs of others going upwards and downwards, and you have eventually the totality of it. And carrying forward different ideas, capturing the role of women in the book comes in very, it's very powerfully evoked. The monks of St. John's wanted, wherever possible, to bring out from the dusty corners of the scriptures where they'd been put, seemingly, certainly historically, and bring out. And so here we have Esther, and I just took a reference to Klimt and clothed this rich, young, beautiful woman in the clothes of the Empress of Persia, which is the story, of course, and she has to cast that off. And in the scriptures, it says, she cast aside the clothes, the ornaments, which she loved to wear. So there was a confliction. She did like the role of being the Empress, the arm candy of the king of the emperor. But at the same time, her faith in her family, because she was a Jewess, of course, she cast that aside and covered herself and really deliberately messed herself up, as it were, in order to approach God in a humble way, to seek ways in order to look for ideas on how to save her people. So there are lots of layers of these things, and they come out, and you can bring certain things out and put them back in again. And here's Tom Ingmeyer with the using not calligraphy, because this is the 10 Commandments, and this is a person actually who does not believe in God, as Thomas would say. He's pretty anti quite a lot of it. I mean, he quit 3 times going through it, and but he only quit because he was having struggles. He didn't automatically take anything for granted. It's an amazing thing to have as a counterbalance to anything that you might take for granted. You know, those who are convinced already, he is not. And he took the typeface because he's saying, this is telling me not to do stuff. This is, so you can see how he approached that in that way to put over that feeling. So you could, as I said, how do you make things look a certain way? How do you choose letters, forms to create a mood? He did it with a great deal of thought and artistry. But then here again, another artist involved, which I didn't mention, and he is a Greek. I mean, he was an Orthodox monk for 16 years on Mount Athos, and he came into the team, and he's an icon painter, but wonderfully cooperative member of the team. I mean, I would say I would like a face this big there, and he would just do it. And then I might say, you've gone and made it too small. And you say, well, that's right. You scrape it off and just do another one. I mean, that is a different attitude to the way we were being self-conscious. And it was a job of work, and that's the way, and a job of work for God, in his case. It's completely different from Thomas. But what I then did was took a fragment of Thomas's graphics, broke it up and tore it apart, and used that as a symbol. This is Moses looking to the promised land with a tablet, partly broken stone there with it. So, these are all stories of things, and going into the promised land from the Egyptian culture, leaving that behind, fighting your way across the Jordan, and carrying those words, the law, into the promised land and across. So, and you can see that in the detail. And then, of course, the bugs, which were another part of it. They were from the very beginning meant to not just for fun, although they are so beautiful, and I always wanted really naturalism, absolutely almost surreal naturalism of nature, as it were, because of the sheer wonderment that butterflies and bugs have, and looked upon as something of God's creation, a wonderful symbol of that, because they're so intricate and amazing. But towards the end of the book, I was asking the natural history artist to tell stories with them. Because in the book of historical volumes, you've got nothing but conflict. The whole thing is up and down fighting and division. And here we have, so I had him do the carpenter ants. Sorry, I got trigger happy. It's at the point where the children of Israel can't agree with each other, so they all take their bit and they all go in different directions. They're not pulling together. But it tells makes me a serious point. So the bugs started to fight each other. They were being, parasitical, and so on. And so, other than the sheer beauty of these, which is meant, and this again was meant consciously, because these guys come from here. I mean, they grow around, they breed around the prairie and the countryside around St. John's Abbey. And so that was the idea of the milkweed and the, what's the name of the butterfly? Thank you so much. And so on. And then I use them as fragments elsewhere, and so on. And here, there's a little play here. The Schlage family donated this book. And so there's Barbara, so the B, and he's Stephen. So just wove that into it. Quite subtle, not too heavy, but in there. So you had these little elements, acknowledging donors, acknowledging nature, and also this is now worked onto the Book of Revelation. Now, I have a dilemma. So I've gone on too far, and I've been a bit uncomfortable because I've had to change my story as I go along. But I'm just sharing that with you, but I hope it's not been too obvious. So let's go on. And I just want, this is a last few slides. Now, I either go for that or I ask you questions, answer questions. But I think, keep going. All right, keep going. Well, it's just that I keep seeing the odd person going, like that. I can see them. Don't worry, I can see them. So here you have the 7 churches and the letters. And this was the thing I did enjoy because I did do it all myself. So I wanted to. I didn't know why I wanted to. I always thought the Book of Revelation was going to be lots of fireworks and that would be something I would enjoy doing. And then, of course, I ended up having to get into it. And, of course, it's heavy stuff. But by this point, the thing was that the committee I was working for, and we'd built up a relationship of trust. So they got a little bit silly at times, and if there's any member of the CIT here, you forgive me for saying this, because they would then say, well, Donald will know what to do with this. Well, Donald didn't know what to do with this necessarily, but they got to that point where they trusted that I might bring something to it that they would value, so that was right. So there was a certain amount of looseness, and what's going on, of course, is, I won't say that, but they have the lamb and the seven seals, and I can see my notes now that I took, because trying to unravel what was going on there. But basically, I chose the 7 churches, the breaking of the seals, and the story of the woman and the dragon, which not a lot of people, not everybody's familiar with it, but basically you have, of course, this woman who is giving birth to a child. The devil, in the form of a serpent, tries to snatch the child from her at that moment, but he is fought off, the devil, by the archangel. The child is snatched up and taken to his father in heaven. The devil falls to earth. She is rescued by the wings of a great eagle and is carried away to safety. The devil and his pals fall down to earth and continue fighting here. See, I hadn't worked that out, so I had to really work it out. War in heaven, war on earth, and then off it goes. Then you have your 7, then you have your 4 horsemen, and the whole thing's starting to come to a real climax. So she is staring at the devil, and she has got her hand to protect it, instinctive to protect the child. The devil is vanquished, chopped into pieces, but has 10 masks, 10 faces. And there was a point at this, when constructing this mask and putting these faces, which were masks, that I had a real feeling of actually the devil not being somebody else, not being, but actually the mask, actually the devil is us. We have the masks, and we have the potential to be just as bad as anybody else we read about in the papers. And that came across to me when painting those things, and I was thinking, if you peel that mask away, what would you find? And it felt quite personal. And down he comes, and he falling to earth, and drops. And actually, I did at one point paint in the background the city of Minneapolis in quite a lot of detail. Nothing personally on. So I know we're in St. Paul. And you see, yes, I would say it was St. Paul when I was on the other side of the river, but in fact, it was just trying to bring it, to here, to us, to now, and of course, we don't. But in fact, the CIT said, couldn't you put it somewhere else? Which is fair enough. So I sort of did. I took the dome, I took the metrodome out of it, which sort of made it less. And then came down, of course then, but dropped it down, and I took, again, the sense of, we're getting horror. I don't particularly like these guys. I hate these worry me, these praying mantis. I don't know about you, but they make my flesh creep. So I chose something that made my flesh creep, because the whole idea of this coming down to us. So she is taken away on the wings of the angel, carried away, and he falls to heaven, and the battle is continued on earth. But I also, in the background, snuck in the representation of Monticello nuclear power plant, because to me, that really feels very close to what's being said in the words. because, and then he comes down, and you've got the fighting going on in Earth. You've got the background of the things. You've got the power. You've got the nuclear power element, and then back to the reality of making it. Here's a lot of pulling and pushing about pieces of paper and color, and tearing things out, referring to microscopic pictures of cancer cells and sort of sickness and the modern things, AIDS virus pictures, trying to construct something, and then the finished thing where the lamb, of course, starts off, the seals are beginning to be broken, and it releases. And then the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. These are the cancer cells blown up, which are just imposed on that. More bacterial microscopic representations. The mantis fighting around. You've got the 4 heads of the, you can't see them well, but there's the eagle, the head of the man's head, and then the lion's head is at the end, and then the ox is there. So, and then in the background I put oil wells. I mean, that's what people fight about. I mean, they fought about olive oil in the old days. Now they fight about, gasoline. But it's really, what do we fight about? It's about commodities. We fight about things, and we put ourselves in the whole world in danger because of it. And so I just did that to represent a modern sort of form of conflict that goes on, and I don't know what happens next, yes. And of course there are eyes everywhere and so on. And I did also put in a little hint of the nuclear danger things, because they don't actually invite you into those places very often. I mean, I suppose they do. But the point is, in the scripture it says, it didn't matter if you were a king or anybody, there was nowhere to hide from this conflict. There was nowhere to hide from the absolute end. And I can't think of a better metaphor, actually, than a nuclear. It only needs a few accidents. It doesn't have to even have a horrible intention. We've had it. There's nowhere to hide from that. You can't, and it says you can't crawl under stones to get away. You couldn't. And so that's why. So I'm unpeeling this, because this is the sort of a genuine feeling of horror I have of this. And so, as I would of the end of the world. And so, but that's what's being talked about. And yet, there is promise at the end of the Spirit being put on the bones, and people would all be gathered together to sit at the feet of the Lamb and of God. And indeed, this Bible has gone out of our hands, and it's now doing its own thing. Just as here in this university, really wonderfully creative sharing of what there is, not preaching, but saying, what do you bring to these things, sharing in the library every day. You know, the Heritage printed version has gone all over the world. Not all over the world, but it's gone as far as Australia, and that's far enough away, but it's doing its own thing, and other people are taking it and running with it. And it would be, I'm rather hoping that you're going to be able to keep the volume here, because it would be a great pity if in a few months' time it has to leave, but it's here now, and it's being used, and that is something we as the artists involved can stand back in awe of, because it's not ours anymore, it's yours. It's Concordia's, it's whoever else. And that has become a magical thing to see. And here is, in fact, a lovely concert and St Martin's in the Fields in Trafalgar Square in London, where they have a set of the volumes, and they had this marvelous choral program, and actually projected on the walls inside the church moving pictures. So they weren't just still. They were so that the psalms were there and moved. And these all came out. So the monks, the little filigree, gold filigree, actually moved along the walls out towards you. Amazing what people can do. And here, on the very last illumination in the Gospels and Acts, to the ends of the earth. So let's hope that's what happens, but it'll be you and people like you that do it, not us. So I don't know, I think we've probably got to the end. I'm certain we have. Actually, what time do we start? Where is it? I'm looking for my timekeeper. Yes. So I didn't get to the questions. I didn't get actually the pictures that I thought I was going to get either. But that was my fault, entirely my fault, because when we got here, I decided I wanted to switch them around, and in fact, I got what I intended to give you in the first place, but we did get the one that I wanted to bring in, which was pertinent to today, which was, you can't hate your way out. So, thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. And it's quite a journey. I'm just handing it over to you now. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh my God.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for coming, and what an extraordinary evening to sit with someone who has invested in his entire life in a dream like this. Just a treasure to hear you talk about those illustrations and the process, and how God brought you to be in the position you are today through teachers who recognized something in you and gave you encouragement. So terrific. Thank you so much. Let's thank him one more time. I'm sure most of you are aware, but if not, stjohnsbible.org, that's all one word, has marvelous resources that we've been using here at Concordia to help us understand these illustrations. Of the 160, I would guess you touched on probably a couple dozen tonight. So please, if you're interested, go to that website and find resources there. And again, there's time to see the books in our Library Technology Center. If you'd like to do that, you can get there without going outside. And that's a bonus here tonight. God bless you and have a wonderful evening.